Welcome to Star Torch Academy. We're here to build a character from scratch, which is perfect because the Academy has one small administrative problem. The President has no level, no skill, and no echoes. But by the end of the video, she'll go from this to this. And I'll show you the exact order I used, what it cost, and where I decided the build was good enough to stop. I'll also explain why I don't chase Energy Regen too early, because it can end up costing you hundreds of tuners. A lot of people ask me how I use the +10 method and how I build my character from scratch, and that also gives me the perfect chance to explain how this process can be different depending on where your account is at. Luckily, I left Lucilla almost completely untouched for this, so yes, the President has basically been waiting here for the comment section to approve her budget. Anyway, my name is still Belly and welcome to my channel. Okay, so full disclosure, I already gave her a few levels and skills, but I didn't record that part. She is still kinda useless though, I'm not gonna lie, but we're going to fix that. So if we pretend I just got the character, what do I do first? Well, the obvious answer is that I level her. At this point, almost all my wave plates go towards getting the character to the highest level my account allows, which in my case means level 90. Because I've been playing for a long time, I usually have a decent number of crystal solvents saved up. And if I want to build a new character immediately, this is exactly what I save them for. That normally lets me get the character leveled very quickly, sometimes even on the first day, but if you don't have saved up, then this simply becomes the next 2 or 3 days of farming. Either way, the character's level is my first priority. The next step would be to level her skill and weapon. But before you copy this exact order, there is one reason my version of this probably looks much faster than it would on a newer account. While I'm leveling her, I'll also use any skill or weapon material I already have. Wuthering Waves does give you quite a lot of those through events and the battle pass, and material chests that let you choose what you need later. I usually save those chests until a new character arrives, so I tend to have a decent stockpile ready. I've been playing since day one and I always got the battle pass, which means it gives me pretty major advantage when it comes to building characters this quickly. And the last time I spent wave plates on Resonator XP or Weapon XP or Shell Crates was at least a year or two ago. Between the battle pass and event rewards, I usually stay slightly net positive on those resources, so they keep building up in the background. And this thing is pretty generous from Kuro, but it also means that newer accounts will probably need a few extra days and more wave plates to reach the same point, and that is completely normal. If the character I want to build arrives though, I'm not shy about using those I saved. If we put everything in a strict order, I level the character first, then work on the skills until I hit the weekly boss material wall. Once the skills are locked for the week, I move on to the weapon because that is usually something I can finish immediately. So by the end of this phase, the character and weapon should be at max level, while the skills are upgraded as far as the weekly materials currently allow. The new material tracking system also makes this much easier because you can select the character and see exactly what you need. The order itself hasn't really changed, but now the game makes it much easier to know when you have farmed enough. Since the rest of the skills are locked behind weekly materials, I focus on the one that matters the most. The game shows you which skills you should prioritize now, and usually it's the middle tree as number 1, and then if it points me towards Lucilla's liberation, then I take that one to level 10 right after. Then I move on to the next most important skill, instead of spending materials across everything already. Now, because I'm a completionist, I will eventually level every skill to 10 anyways. That isn't always necessary since some of those upgrades might barely affect the character's final damage, but I like to finish the entire character, that's just how I play. At this point, Lucilla has her levels, she has a finished weapon, and her important skills are either done or waiting for more weekly materials. Which means we can finally move on to my favorite part, building the echoes. And this next step matters because it decides whether the build stays manageable or it turns into an endless grind where your character stays unfinished while you burn through thousands of tuners and days of wave plates chasing the perfect echoes. The goal here is to let me start using her as quickly as possible since she's a new character and I want to be able to play her now, and for that she doesn't need the perfect set yet. And I'm assuming that your goals is the same as mine here. So first, we check which echo set she needs and which mains that I'm looking for. Then I start using the whole method we talked about in the other 2 videos. I take each new echo to level 10 and check what it gives me. And since I've already explained this process twice, I'm not going to sit here and explain every single role again. For the first set, I'm also not being especially picky. If it gives me a crit stat early, I take it to level 25, and even if it doesn't have double crit, this is what I'm using for now, because I want to move on to the next piece and do the same thing again. The goal right now is simply to get one usable echo in every position, because a mediocre echo with the correct main stat can still do its job very well, but an imaginary echo that is perfect but needs 3 days to farm can't. So I'm going to fast forward through the process until Lucilla has a complete set with the correct main stat and every echo has actually been leveled. At that point she's playable. And since she has a full set, we can start improving it instead. This is where I look at the full build and find the weakest piece. Maybe one of the echoes only has crit rate and nothing else that helps her. With every slot covered, this is the first piece that I try to replace. And this time I can afford to be much more picky. I use the same method again, but instead of accepting the first usable piece, I keep going until I find something that is clearly better. Maybe that means double crit. Maybe it means double crit with a third useful stat. But before you call a double crit echo finished, there's one more check that can completely change which piece you should replace next. I usually set the limit to 7.5 crit rate and 15% crit damage. If either of those rolls is lower than that, then it becomes a piece I eventually want to replace, unless it has a useful third stats like attack or energy regen or whatever the character uses. And here is why Energy Regen works a little bit differently. For most characters, Energy Regen has a target. Until you reach that target, it can be extremely valuable, but once the complete build has enough, any extra Energy Regen usually stops doing anything for you. Crit damage and crit rate are different because they normally keeps improving the build. So imagine I force Energy Regen onto my first 2 echoes and spend a lot of tuners doing so. Then the last 2 echoes also roll Energy Regen naturally, even though I wasn't even trying to get it. Now the build has more Energy Regen than it actually needs, which means that the Energy Regen I forced early is basically wasted and I spent resources to get there. That is why I prefer to finish the set first, see what I get, and then try to improve 2 targets. So the double crit doesn't automatically mean for me that the piece is finished forever. It depends on how low the rolls are and how many resources I'm willing to spend on the character. Once I find an echo with rolls that are good enough, I equip it and move on to the next weakest piece. And I keep doing this until I have the full set that reaches a point where I'm happy with it. The nice thing about doing it this way is that Lucilla remains playable throughout the entire process instead of sitting unfinished while I wait for 5 perfect echoes to appear. It also makes the farming feel much less forced because I'm no longer trying to finish the entire character immediately. I can skip a day or 2 if I don't feel like farming echoes. It depends on your schedule, how much time I have to play, how far I actually want to take the build as well. If I reach a point where I don't feel like chasing perfect echoes for her, then I just simply stop here. The characters already work. The good thing about doing it this way is that this gives you a natural stopping point. So even if you're still missing that last double crit piece, you usually already have a build that's good enough to fully enjoy your character. You can always come back later for that echo. And if you don't feel like coming back, you move on and start saving for the future characters that are just around the corner. This has happened to me and it might happen to you too. And at the end of the day, this is still going to be RNG. We're just making sure that we get more chances at the RNG. And no echo is worth quitting the game over. The game is way too good for that, so let's make sure that doesn't happen. And before you say, okay, but now my echo experience becomes a new problem. And yes, that might eventually happen, but that doesn't mean the method failed or simply replaced one problem with another. It means that you move the bar higher because now you can test more echoes than you could before. Since we moved past the tuner bottleneck, eventually you're going to reach the next problem, which is echo experience. Think of it like this. You walk up a staircase where one of the steps is missing. The missing step was tuners. And this method helps you build that step for you so you can move one step higher. But once you get there, you discover that the next step is missing too. The next step is an echo experience. But you're still not standing at the bottom of the staircase, you've made progress. You just reached the new bottleneck that you couldn't reach before. So you haven't replaced the problem, you moved the bottleneck. So now, where does this leave us? Lucilla finished with 71 crit rate and 270 crit damage. After recycling the failed echoes, the actual cost came down to 800 tuners rough and around 200 golden echo experience tubes. This is even below the 1200 estimate for double crit build from part 1 using this method. So we ended up with a generally strong build without having to chase perfect rolls forever. And if you're still here listening to me talk, Lucilla told me that you should probably subscribe already, because otherwise she'll give you an F. See you next time, belly out.